Hello everybody, this is the Self-Sufficient Off-Grid Hobby Farm on Facebook, YouTube, and MeWe. And today I'm going to talk to you about growing grain without any irrigation, without any water. Most specifically, I'm out here in the desert. Before I get started, you're going to have to bear with me. I just had my braces adjusted today, and my mouth is understandably sore. So I have several little plots, several little experiments where I'm doing different strains of barley and wheat. And I'm trying to develop a strain, and I'm working on a strain, especially even with other people, that's more suited for this. That's going to require even less water and produce more grain. Behind me, you see a standard barley, the most common barley. You can go to any feed store and buy just barley grain, and this is it. This is what I seeded it with. Earlier in the year, I had a tragedy. Right over here on the river, there's several homeless camps along there, and they like to come up and steal all kinds of equipment from me: generators, gasoline, tools, brick, a pickup truck one time, tillers, chainsaws, anything that they can get their hands on, they'll take. And one of the things they were doing was cutting through my fence and stealing stuff. And before I found, because I got a lot of land fenced off, before I found where that cut was, they had been coming in and out, and eventually the cattle, because there's a guy out here on BLM land, has huge grazing rights and water rights. His cattle found that hole in my fence, and they came on in and ate all my barley down. I've got a small area here, about an acre, where they passed through rather quickly, and they grazed it down quite a bit, but didn't completely destroy it. But everything else is destroyed. I'm not going to be able to get a harvest even off of this little patch here. It's too thin from the cattle moving their way through. Luckily, I caught all the homeless people on camera, and that's being dealt with on via the security cameras. But let's get going. So what I do is, in the very end of winter time, when you start getting those warmer days where the top 1.5 to 2 inches of soil starts to thaw, below that it's still frozen, that's when you want to get out there and broadcast. Now I use what you can use will be a fertilizer spreader or a grass seed spreader that you can buy at a hardware store or a feed store for broadcasting fertilizer or grass seed or whatever out. And this works perfect for that. And you just walk along, and you want a rate of about 1 grain per inch. And you'll get about a 85 to 95% germination rate. So don't think you need to go in thick. So a 50-pound bag covers a lot of distance at 1 grain per inch. A lot of those other strains were doing a lot better, but what happens is you will continue having the ground freeze at night and thaw during the day. You will get more snow, but barley and wheat don't mind that. They can get snowed on. Even when the plant is really short, it will survive frost and it will survive snow. And it stays really short. The plant almost looks like it reaches a point where it's about 4 to 6 inches and then kind of stops growing for about a month and a half. And I think that's its way of surviving any last chance of frost. And then all of a sudden, boom, you'll come out the next day and it'll be 9 inches tall. The next day it's even taller and taller and taller, and next thing you know, it's going to seed. Now, this strain right here doesn't get very tall where I'm at, whereas when you're out in an area that gets a lot of rainfall, or you're irrigating, it's going to get 3 times as tall as what you see here. But this is fine. It still produces the same amount of grain. The kernels are slightly smaller, but not much. And I wish I could really get you to see these. Blow some of that chaff off. But you're producing the same amount of grain. It's just slightly smaller. Same thing with the wheat. And then you can plant however much you want, and you can use a hand scythe to cut it down, and you can use a wood chipper and a shredder, or an old swamp cooler, or something of the sort spinning, even a box fan that you can get your bundles after you've windrowed it and let it dry out a little bit, and dip the heads down in there, and that'll knock all the grain off. And then of course you can winnow it using a fan, using the wind, however you want to do it, on a tarp, on a concrete slab, whatever, to get your grain out. A lot of livestock won't like barley, especially your poultry, because it's got that hull or husk around each individual grain, whereas most strains of wheat do not. However, there are strains of barley that I'm working with that have no husk or hull around the grain, and then your animals will readily take it. So you plant it. So out here where I'm at in the Sierra Nevada desert, let's see, around March, I would say beginning to mid March, I'm starting to get those days where the top 1.5 to 2 inches is thawing. And I'll come out, and what I'll do is I'll just broadcast the seed right on the ground and then come over it and till it. Now you can use a push tiller, a walk behind tiller. You can use a tiller you pull with the lawnmower. You can use a tiller you pull with the tractor. If you really want to get Western with it and get fancy, you can disc it, you can rake it, whatever. You just want to get that seed about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep. That's all you got to do. Then, as the ground is thawing out and winter is ending and you're getting your last little bit of early spring rains and everything, your plants will take off. And then once they get to a certain point, even when there's no more moisture in the ground, there's no more rain or humidity or whatever coming down, the plant will continue to grow off of its reserves, and it will, stunted as it may be, will produce your grain. And you will get good harvests off of it. So that's barley and that's wheat. Now another thing I've done is feed corn. Feed corn's a little bit different. Yeah, it's semi-cold hardy, and you can just go down to your feed store and buy feed corn, whole kernel corn, and you'll broadcast it in the same way and till it in the same way. One year I grew it without any water or any irrigation of any sort, planting it as early in the spring as I can once I felt that we're probably past the last chance of freeze. If not, it's only a week or two away. That's a good time to plant. And even if you get a little bit of frost on your young corn plants when they're 1 inch or 2 tall, they might get a little bit of damage on their first leaves, but the plant will still stay alive and still continue to grow past that. You want to get it in as early as you can without it obviously completely freezing and killing the plant, but little frosts, little freezes overnight. For the most part, the corn can handle it. One year I didn't do any water, and the corn plants never got any bigger around the stalks than my thumb or middle finger, but it got a height of about 4 feet was all. But it put off ears, small as they may be. There were ears of corn, and I produced a pretty good yield off that. The following year, I didn't plant them as thick, so their roots weren't competing as much for water, and I watered it once a week for an hour using a broadcast sprinkler, and I just took those and I put them on top of 6-foot tall sticks or stakes out of the ground and hooked them up. Each row was a zone, and I, had however many zones I needed to go across the field, and just once a week for an hour watered it. That was it, and that stuff got nearly 6 feet tall and put off bigger ears and bigger grain, and I had a way better harvest. But chances are, where you're at, you don't need to do that at all. I didn't need to do it. I still had a corn harvest. Another thing you can do with feed corn is when its stalks get about as big around as your pinky, go out and cut it. Lay it in windrows, dry it out, and use it as hay. Pigs loved it. The dairy goats loved it. The meat rabbits loved it. So that's another option too. I called it corn fodder. That wasn't the exact right term for it, but I would cut them down when the stalks got about as big around as my pinky. The plant was about 3 feet tall-ish, and that seemed to work out pretty good for hay too. The other thing that I've done was black oil sunflower seed. Now, I only did it one time, and I broadcasted it about the same time of year as I did the corn, and in the same way, just like with the barley, as far as broadcasting it and tilling it in. And I did it in 2 halves, though, that one time that I did it. One half, I just went out and spread it out on the ground, right? And I tilled it in. The other half, I did in rows, spaced 2 feet apart, because I was reading where their roots will compete for water, and the competition gets really fierce, and I thought, well, I'm in the desert. I need to kind of negate that from happening from what I'm trying to do. So the half that I grew with just broadcasting it on the ground, not in rows, the sunflower plants only got about 1 foot to 1.5 feet tall, but they did produce heads and they did produce grain, and it was really, really small. The sunflower seeds were really small, but that would work for animal feed. The half where I did it in rows, I planted each seed 6 inches apart all the way down the rows. The rows were 2 feet apart. Once they sprouted up and were looking pretty healthy, I thinned it out so each sunflower plant was about 1 foot apart. And you wouldn't believe, the sunflower plants got 2 times, almost 3 times as tall. bigger flowers, and obviously bigger seeds. So those are three things that I've experimented out here in the desert with, where you don't have to water. Yeah, the feed corn, the one time I did put a little bit of water once a week for an hour. That's not much. But without water rights, the county will come out and complain at you for that. So, anyways, you can do all three of those different things: barley or wheat. You can do black oil sunflower, and you can do feed corn without water out here in the desert. If you did water your feed corn a little bit once a week for an hour, and your black oil sunflower seed once a week for an hour, you're going to get a bigger harvest. But sometimes you can't afford to do that. I have a nice well punched in here, and I got a little bit of water rights. Not much, but a little bit. And I'm just trying to find a way to where I can be as self-sufficient, and I'm already off-grid, but I'm trying to get as self-sufficient as possible and try not to run the well pump. Try not to use water out of the well. Just broadcast it out in nature at the right time of the year and have it work. And I'm finding ways to do that, and I am having success, and I am getting harvests. And I'll try and find some of the other videos. I have older videos, and I've got other pictures and everything that I'm working on that I can share with you and post as well. But I wanted to get on here and kind of explain that. I love sharing information. There is no such thing as a stupid question. If you have a question, reach out to me. I am more than happy to explain it in detail. Some of the things that require more communication, I can set up a time where we can actually call and talk. I don't want nothing out of it. I'm just happy to help you. If you have any questions, let me know. So anyways, I got to go inside and talk to a gentleman about a horse. So you guys take care. Have a good evening.